Við förum í vesturbæinn í Winnipeg, þar sem var áður hjartað í íslenska samfélaginu. Þetta niðurnýtt svæði, nánast eins og draugabær og mannlífið frekar dapurt. Íslendingarnir eru löngu fluttir burt, en þarna ólst upp leiðsögukona okkar, Janice Ólöf Magnússon.
I was born here in the heart of Gooley Town. This was very much an Icelandic environment. Along Icelandic Main Street, from here up about a kilometer to the west, would be the core of the Icelandic community, built up between about 1905 and mid-1920s.
And you had a lot of Icelandic shops then?
Very much in the 20s and 30s. It may look like an Icelandic ghost town now, but in the 20s and 30s, this area was very vibrant. It probably peaked in the 30s, started going downhill a little in the 40s and the 50s in terms of people leaving. But you could do your business in Icelandic. You could go and buy your groceries in an Icelandic shop and you'd be speaking Icelandic, of course. You could go to an Icelandic billiard hall, a service station for your car. You could buy a bicycle in Icelandic, jewelry, hats, dresses. Of course, Icelandic books and newspapers were sold here. There were at least 2 Icelandic bookstores, and the newspapers were printed right there. But not just newspapers, there was Icelandic publishing in at least 5 different presses here. And you could, when you were weary, you could stop at an Icelandic cafe for málakaffi. You could go and see an Icelandic doctor here, just up Victor Street, more toward Notre Dame. And you could, this is important to say, you could study Icelandic language and literature here at the Jón Bjarnason Academy. And you could get a very good game of chess in Icelandic here.
This is the big Good Templar house.
This is the Good Templar
house. Which was very important because the Templars movement was very important.
Yes, and you could go to, it was called Good Templars Hall or House, Gooley Hall by non-Icelanders, although many Icelanders called it Gooley Hall too. Gooley was a bit of a derogatory term in the old days, not so much in my day.
Was there a lot of drinking?
There must have been, there has been some discussions. Evidently in early Winnipeg there were a lot of saloons on Main Street. I don't know much about it, but there has been some controversy of the rural Icelanders criticizing city Icelanders for drinking too much in the early days. Now, I'm sure there was a problem like there would have been in any other community in Winnipeg. And, you know, Icelanders like their drink, some do. And it was also tied in with the suffragette movement, the women trying to get the right to vote. They were absolutely sick and tired of their husbands coming home drunk or going to the bar and neglecting the family. That was part of it. The women were very much behind the temperance movement in Winnipeg in general and in the Icelandic community.
Sumir Íslendingar lentu í solli. Stefán G. orti kvæði íslenska vændiskonu Ragnheiði, öðru nafni Salli og Hara. Kvæðið fjallar öðru fremur skínhelgi. Og svo sagt frá Sauragísla. Hann hraktist frá Íslandi vegna óknytta en var nú kominn til Winnipeg.
Talsverð óregla viðgengst meðal Íslendinga hér, einkum í húsi því nefnt Íslendingahús, sem Sauragísli nú leigir. Þar eru dans og slark samkomur oft á hverju kveldi og eru lögregluþjónar farnir að hafa auga á því. Líka eru betri landar hér farnir að amast við þessu, því það kemur óorði á þá í heild sinni og hefur verið vandað við Gísla. Haldist þetta framvegis, munu einhverjir Íslendinga kæra Gísla. Hann var annars nýlega settur inn, því hann lá fullur á götunni.
You would go here and you would go to a dance here in Icelandic, a fundraising event to help people in need. You'd go to a poetry reading here. I think this is where Stefan Stephenson gave his first reading when he came to Winnipeg. And he stayed on Agnes Street, just up there. And there'd be dances here and tombolas, all in Icelandic. And of course, there were temperance meetings. This is where the two lodges held their temperance meetings, and where they lobbied for prohibition.
Viðurnefnið Gúlís fengu Íslendingarnir líklega af Góðtemplarahúsinu. Fyrst var ein stúka sem nefndist Hekla, en Íslendingarnir voru deilugjarnir og stúkan klofnaði og það voru tvær stúkur, Hekla og Skuld. Þessar deilur voru nefndar Heklugosið 1888. Svo var það 1925 að kviknaði í Góðtemplarahúsinu. Þá orti skáldið Lúðvík Kristjánsson, kallaður Lúlli, mikið gamankvæði.
Well, he documented the events of the fire here in 1925 and the reconstruction of the building. And I think maybe he may have bent the truth a bit when he said that the Grand Chief Templar came with a bucket of home brew to help put out the fire. I have this poem with me. It's 70 verses long, but if you read for me the first two verses, we can get an idea of what this hall was about.
Brunin. Það dylst ekki neinum að vel þarf að vanda, það veraldar smíði sem lengi á að standa. Og bjargfastir stólpar og stálbogar tryggðu, hið stórfræga skrauthof sem templarar byggðu. Það reis ekkert voldugra á veraldarbóli, í vonar og trúar og kærleikans skjóli, en lífið í þessari ljómandi höllu varð loksins svo þurrt að það kveiknaði í öllu. Your father was a keen photographer.
Yeah, he studied. He wasn't a professional, but it was his hobby, and he studied both the science and the art of photography. So he ended up taking a lot of pictures along Icelandic Main Street. So through his pictures, and I don't know where they all were. I've been trying to figure out where these pictures, which buildings they were of, or where they were. My mother was able to help me with some. And one that was really interesting was of a Chinese laundry. And I didn't know that it was that, but my mother looked at it and she says, "Oh, that's one of the Chinese laundries." She couldn't remember where it was, but through some detective work I was able to determine that it was in front of this very apartment block.
And then on the other side of the road you had the most important printing press?
Yes, it's 674 Sargent, I believe. That's the address I've found over and over again for the O.S. Thorgerson printing press and publisher. He was the man who published the Almanac, which was very, very popular among the rural Icelandic settlers.
And this here is the bicycle shop.
This was a bicycle shop in one of these buildings here. It was Sumerleði Matthews, I believe his name was. He was here for a long time, and when I was a little girl, he fixed my bicycle.
So Jan, this is Sargent and Victor, the heart of Guli town.
Yes, that's what we call the heart of the Icelandic district.
Yeah, with the First Lutheran Church there.
First Lutheran Church behind us, yeah.
And the cafe where Charlie Thorson sat.
And many other Icelanders. As my dad would say, was the place where the learned and the not so learned would gather to drink mulla coffee, to talk, debate, and maybe even recite poetry.
But Charlie was the famous cartoonist.
He was definitely, he was in there because his girlfriend, he fell in love with the waitress Kristen there. And Kristen, the likeness of Snow White is a likeness of Kristen.
Yeah, and he also did Bugs Bunny.
Bugs Bunny, Elmer Fudd,
yeah,
and lots of others.
But you had a lot of businesses in this. place.
Yes. This area is where there was a cluster of Icelandic shops in the same block there. Well, first of all, there was, according to my older sisters, when they were young, they shopped at Steinis on the corner here, an old-fashioned grocery store where the grocer would stand behind the counter and you would ask for things and he'd run around and get them. And of course, it was all done in Icelandic.
And that was Steinis.
Steinis.
Yeah.
And there in the block that the Weevil Cafe is in, there was at one time a grocer there. Now this was around from about 1920 into the 40s. There were all sorts of different Icelandic businesses there. But they included a grocery store, always a billiards hall next to the Weevil Cafe. And there were at least 2 bookstores, Finnur Johnson, and later on David Bjornsson had a bookstore and bindery. There was a hat store, dress stores, and there was a dress store on this side of the street as well.
Yeah.
There was sometimes a barber shop over there. And at the end of the block was the Olafsons Woodyard.
I worked at the Weevil Cafe there in 1940, just about the beginning of the war, 40 to 41, and I was 17 years old, so it was a few years ago now. It was on the corner of Sargent and Victor. Most of the people were Icelandic, and I spoke Icelandic, so that's the reason I got the job. And it was a very popular spot at that time. I mean, Sargent Avenue was really known for the Icelandic population. And we were very busy, yeah, because in the morning we always had the coffee drinkers. People that lived in the area that always came in for a cup of coffee, 5 cents a cup. They didn't like it when it went up to 10 cents. We had all kinds of people in there. The editor of the Logberg Heimskringla, he came in there quite frequent. And the lawyer, Arne Egertsen, he came in there as well. We had pilots. Well, they were learning how to fly from the Colin Janison school, flying school. And they were from Iceland. And then they went back to Iceland and started Loftleiðir. And I believe that was the beginning of Iceland Air. So that was something different. Oscarsons had the paint shop next door. Bjornsons were the bookstore across the street. And Samson, I think his name was, he was a police. He came in there as well. The police walked the beat at that time. Yeah, they didn't, drive around in their cars. They walked the beat because they would often come in the back door for a cup of coffee, something like that. And they were familiar with the people on the street and all. And I believe they always went and checked the doors, of the businesses at night to make sure that they were locked. That's right. Sargent Avenue certainly was a different place than it is now.
Well, here we have the offices of Lögberg, and you had 2 newspapers, Lögberg, which was thought to be liberal, and Heimskringla, which was conservative, but it wasn't really that simple.
Well, the Lögberg was Lutheran and liberal. That was very true. Heimskringla was Unitarian, but they were supposedly supported the Conservative Party a long time ago. Today, I would say, I don't want to generalize, but Unitarians tend to be more on the left to center side of the political spectrum.
But then in the end, the papers merged.
Yes, I think in the late 50s, I think it was then, they merged. They decided they had to get along because they couldn't afford to keep running 2 newspapers.
Vestur-Íslendingar færðu miklar fórnir í fyrri heimsstyrjöldinni. Hermt að 1245 Vestur-Íslendingar hafi tekið þátt en 144 létu lífið. Það merkilegt að skoða blöðin frá þessum tíma. 25. apríl 1918 segir veröld frá 17 ára íslenskum pilti Þorbergi Andréssyni í skotgröfunum. Segir að hann sé fæddur á Bakka við Húsavík og hann sé hetja ber heiður og vinsæld. 31. október segir Heimskringla frá því að Þorbergur hafi fallið fyrir hugsjónir lýðfrelsis og mannréttinda. Hann dó á vígvöllunum í Frakklandi, þá orðinn 18 ára.
There was a lot of people that did not support the First World War, Canada having anything to do with the war, and Icelandic people going to fight in the war. But of course there was a lot of people that thought it was very important that we fight in the war to become part of Canada, to be accepted in Canada. In 1914 or just before that, just before the war started, both the editor of the Logberg and the Heimskringla were against the war. Sigurdur Julius Jónasson being one of them, who was very much of a rabble-rouser or a person that was not in the mainstream of politics, very strongly against the war. Both of them were replaced with new editors who supported the war, probably by the board of each of the newspapers.
But then, of course, you had the famous Stefán G. Stefánsson, who was totally against the war.
Yes, and he had a huge influence among people here, but he was also shunned, as you would well know. Not the whole time. I mean, they treated him as a hero in the end, but yes, he was very much against the war, and I think I have read that he was, there were certain people in the community here that tried to get both him and Sigurdur Julius tried for treason.
There's a lot of Icelanders who were actually killed in the battlefield.
Oh, very, very many in the First World War.
Yeah.
And the Second World War. It had a huge impact on the Icelandic community here. Just for example, because I had older parents, among my mother's friends, there were women who had lost their fiancés in the First World War. Her very dear friend Helen Josefsson, she lost her fiancé in the First World War, and she never married after that. And then there was a shortage of young Icelandic men after the war.
Eftir stríðið voru uppi hugmyndir minnisvarða sem menn vildu reisa til minningar fallna íslenska hermenn. Lampinn eftir Einar Jónsson átti að verða 12 metra hár og kosta 50.000 dali. Þetta var hart deilt. Sumir töldu óviðeigandi að reisa sérstakt íslenskt minnismerki, en aðrir, eins og Stefán G. Stefánsson, voru á móti slíkri veggsömun hins blóðuga stríðs. Minnisvarðinn reis aldrei. Íslendingarnir fundu sér ýmislegt annað til að deilum. Þeir voru líka viðkvæmir fyrir orðspori sínu og umtali gamla landið. Leikflokkur í Winnipeg endi til sýninga á Fjallaeyvindi 1913 og fór hinn dáða leikkona Guðrún Indriðadóttir vestur til að leika Höllu. En þetta féll ekki í kramið og í Heimskringlu mátti lesa að þetta veri ljótur og siðspillandi leikur sem sýndi aðalega það sem lægst og dýrstlegast í fari íslensku þjóðarinnar. Þessi viðkvæmni braust aftur fram þegar Halldór Laxness dvaldi í marga mánuði í Manitoba og fór til Nýja Íslands og las þar smásögu sem einmitt hét Nýja Ísland. Í sögunni fjallað hörmungar íslensks bónda í Nýja landinu. Sumir íbúarnir á Nýja Íslandi urðu stórmóðgaðir vegna þessa og sagði Halldór að æft hefði verið á sig og reynt að toga sig niður af pallinum þar sem hann las. Átti skáldið fótum fjör að launa. Það tekur dálítið í hjartað að ganga þessar gömlu götur, innan fátækt fólk og hrörleg hús og hugsa til þess að þarna var eitt sinn blómlegt mannlíf. Þarna var til dæmis skóli sem kendur var við prestinn Jón Bjarnason en núna skýli fyrir heimilislaust fólk.
This used to be the Jón Bjarnason Academy.
Yes, that's right. The Icelandic school, high school, and it was a junior college as well. And it was different than other high schools in Winnipeg because it was funded partly by the Lutheran Synod and by private donations from Icelandic people, not just in Winnipeg, but all over. And it was meant that students would come here from different places in North America.
And so the kids came here to learn Icelandic?
Yes, Icelandic. At first it was all Icelandic kids pretty much, but not there were a few English kids. Later on there were more. But the other thing that distinguished it was a Christian church. They had a 15-minute prayer period in the morning. And by the way, they still welcomed Unitarians. If you were a Unitarian, you took a library period instead of the prayer period. The other thing that distinguished it, of course, was that they taught Icelandic language and literature here. And the teachers were scholars. The academic standings were very high, and that attracted a lot of English students.
But this was like a mainstay of the Icelandic community, this?
Very much a mainstay for Icelandic students from the rural areas to come to be with other Icelanders. The principal was Runolfur Martinsson. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing his name. And he was there the whole time. He was the principal. Salome Haldursson, Agnar Magnusson, that was my dad, and other very well-known scholars as well, such as Tryggvi Olsen, O.T. Anderson.
But you also link Jóhann Magnús Bjarnason, the writer, to this institution.
Yes, Icelanders in Manitoba have had very good teachers. And the reason my father became a teacher here at all was because of Jóhann Magnús Bjarnason. That was his teacher at the Norðurstjarna school near Lundar. And that man inspired so many in that district to go on to university and get their master's degree and go into education, learn Latin. My father studied Latin because of Jóhann Magnús Bjarnason and became a teacher because of him. Also, Hjartar Leo was a giant of a teacher in Manitoba, a great mathematician. And he was in Gimli teaching, but he made special trips to Lundar, where my father and his friends were youngsters, and did everything he could to turn them into mathematicians. And that's how my father became a mathematician.
Skáklíf var afar blómlegt meðal Vestur-Íslendinga. Þeirra frægastur var Magnús Smith, sem var fæddur á Snæfellsnesi. Hann var þrívegis Kanadameistari og teldi við heimsmeistarana Capablanca og Lasker og ritstýrði reyndar tímariti með þeim síðarnefnda.
This place has a history in chess.
Housed the Iceland Chess Club.
Yeah.
So there was a resurgence of chess in Winnipeg in general in the 1920s. I think the Icelanders were always playing chess after Magnus Smith was here. But in the mid-1920s, they formed a club again, just as there was a club when Magnus Smith was around. And they called it Chess Club Iceland. It had an Icelandic name, of course. Back in those days, Winnipeg really was a chess center. It was the chess center of Western Canada. And the greats did come through here, like Marcosi and Alekhine, the world champion. The first year there was a city club championship where the clubs played against the clubs. The Iceland Chess Club won the city championship, and that was the year that Marcosi came through. And then out of this Iceland Chess Club came two Winnipeg chess champions. First Carl Thorlaksson, later my dad Agnar Magnusson, and then the chess club also produced the Manitoba champion. It had just been the Northwest Championship, and it just had changed to Manitoba. And so my father won that in 1932, and that's the year that the world champion Alekhine came through Winnipeg and played. So
yeah.
Neither Maroczy nor Alekhine could beat all the Icelanders in the chess club. My father drew both Maroczy and Alekhine. I still have, my father was the secretary of the club. I have all the records of the club. I have chess games back from the 1920s, and I have the game with Alekhine. And
You have the game with Alekhine?
I have the game with Alekhine.
Your father's game with Alekhine?
Yes, I do.
Oh my God, that's something.
Yes.
So this is the Peterson house.
Yeah.
They are restoring it, but it has sort of an eerie, almost ghost-like feeling.
It's been crumbling for some years, yes.
but it's
Yeah.
important. It's a building.
It's an important house in Winnipeg because, well, it was built by Icelandic businessman. I think his name is Bjorn Pettersson, the brother of Reverend Pettersson, who is the minister of the Unitarian Church. And it's probably the most grand house in the West End, built in 1914, I believe. And it has 16-foot Tyndall columns, which you can't see very well right now. And inside there's a ballroom and several bay windows and all sorts of interesting features, including a dumbwaiter. But the most intriguing thing of all is the murals. He had the very well-known artist, Frederick Svensson, who lives down the street, paint murals of Icelandic scenes and legends. And the owner of the house believes that some of the other murals, pictures of paintings of goddesses, were painted by Charlie Thorson himself, who was the son-in-law of Frederick Svensson.
Þess má geta að Friðrik Sveinsson var bróðir nonna, Jóns Sveinssonar, en ekki jafn frægur sem slíkur og manni.
The street was a very Icelandic street. There were many, many, many Icelandic families. The Haldrasons, the Stefansons, the Davidsons, the Longs, the Jonassons, the Petterssons, and many more. And you know, at least half these houses were boarding houses, and they had Icelandic people living in them. The next house over, the Long's house, Mr. Long and Mrs. Long were Good Templars, and they took in young student boarders who came in to go to the JB and to the University of Manitoba, and they tried to have a good influence on them so they would all become Good Templars.
And not drink alcohol.
And not drink. There was no drinking in that house, so it was a very wonderful place. They were very good to their boarders. They treated them like family. Both my mother and father loved them very dearly.
Eitt þekktasti sonur Winnipeg vestur-Íslendingurinn Guy Maddin. Hann hefur gert fjölda kvikmynda, en í Tales from the Gimli Hospital fjallaði hann íslenska arfleifð sína og sögurnar sem hann var alinn upp á.
It's crazy. I thought it was just the way it was everywhere in the world. I grew up in an Icelandic Canadian neighborhood of Winnipeg, the West End, I grew up at Ellis and Arlington. There's Sergeant Victor. Sergeant Victor was the nerve center of the Icelandic neighborhood, right by the First Lutheran Church. I grew up in a beauty salon. The customers were all Icelandic. My aunt, Lillian Ailson, who ran it, spoke Icelandic. My mom spoke Icelandic, Herdis. My grandmother lived there. I just grew up in this crazy Icelandic gynocracy. And the roar of the hairdryers was so loud that all the customers had to shout their Icelandic gossip out into the world. I didn't understand Icelandic, so it was just a kind of a beautiful, mellifluous sing-song that I heard every day of my life. And then Icelandic visitors would come in through the back door and visit my blind grandmother now and then, and I read to her from the Lögberg Heimskringla without understanding a word of what I was saying, but Icelandic came out of my mouth and flooded into my ears and sort of just buffeted my every waking moment, sleeping ones too.
And then you took your experiences into your films, for example, the Tales from the Gimli Hospital, which is about these strange Icelanders.
I think I was actually reacting against my Icelandic heritage with Tales from the Gimli Hospital. I loved it because I loved my family, but I also just found the obsession every Icelandic Canadian person I knew had with genealogy. My family would try unsuccessfully to get me interested in conversations they're having about these really wildly far-fetched genealogical connections between two random Icelanders just brought together. You know, they would sort of, it was almost like they were both midwives at their own birth, somehow struggling until finally a connection was found. And then I was asked to celebrate with them this, you know, this sort of seventh cousin, the great grandnephew sort of connection. And so there's a kind of, and then there was just so much lugubrious sadness in the pioneer histories, just so much death, and death in the most grim ways. And that I just began to think of all Icelandic Canadians as tragic and ridiculous.
So we are drinking our mola coffee here, and
We're going to go for it?
we're going to go for it. Iceland has had a special way of drinking coffee.
Okay, mola coffee. Shall I just give it a shot? I have to say,
Yeah.
I've only seen it. I've never tried it. So this could be, but I'm a two-cuber. I know that much. And coffee in the saucer, right? Slide that over to the other. This is going to be a disaster.
I see, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah,
Way to go.
it's sweet. It's a bit sweet.
Yeah, but that's the old Icelandic way.
Við ána, þar sem var áður Shantytown, að rísa mikið mannvirki, safn helgað mannréttindum. Stjórnarformaður þessara miklu byggingaframkvæmda Árni Thorsteinsson, sem af íslenskum ættum frá Saskatchewan.
Árni, you are the chairman for this brilliant building here in downtown Winnipeg, the Museum for Human Rights.
Yes, that is correct. We started thinking of this. A very good friend of mine, the late Israel Asper, had the idea back in 1998 to establish a museum for human rights located in this historic location at the confluence of the Red and Assiniboine rivers in Winnipeg. And it would be used as a museum and an educational center to promote the cause of human rights around the world. And he believed that Winnipeg was the proper location for such an undertaking because of its long history of promoting and protecting human rights for immigrants that came to Canada from all over the world, including Iceland.
You have layers and layers and layers of immigrants here.
Yes, that's the story of Canada. It's multicultural, very diverse, and today Canada continues to welcome 275,000 immigrants each year from around the world.
This is the location where the Icelanders settled first.
Yes, we believe that the Shantytown, when the Icelanders that migrated north on the Red River in 1875, they established a shantytown just on the north side of the museum and spent the winter there before continuing on to Gimli, Hekla, the next spring.
So you're also planning a memorial for the Icelanders here?
Yes, we would like to create a sculptor memorial in honor of the first Icelandic settlers and immigrants to Canada. So our objective is to have it all completed for the 150th anniversary by 2025.
But you yourself, your family, they come from Saskatchewan.
Yes, the original, my family settled in the Wynyard district of Saskatchewan and homesteaded there in the 1880s. And our family, including myself, have continuously owned that land since 1880, and members of the family have continuously farmed that land since that date. It's one of the oldest family-owned farms in Canada.
Árni Thorsteinsson is as Icelandic as it gets.
Yes, that's true.
So Robbie, what is Núna now?
Núna now is the convergence of contemporary art between Iceland and Canada. It was created through the brain trust of Atle Ásmundsson.
Atli is a kind of a legend here. No.
I don't want to say less of the past consuls and the embassy that's in Ottawa, but from where my generation and I think a lot of people in this area will say Atle has done more than anyone in many years of building those relationships, whether it's through the arts, through business, or just through personal relationships. Atle and Þrúður have done more than I can remember and have done more than we could ever repay.
So it's about art, film, literature.
It is absolutely interdisciplinary. We've had writers, dancers, actors, we've done plays, movies have shown here, contemporary new music, DJs, FM Belfast, Snorri Helgason, Lalo, Olaf Arnolds, Bagulútur.
So you're keeping in touch with the
we are like
people up there.
We're all new cousins for sure. Talk to everyone regularly.
And you're Icelandic.
One whole quarter.
One whole quarter.
Í næsta þætti förum við landamærin til Bandaríkjanna og heimsækjum fólk af íslenskum ættum sem býr í Norður Dakota. En mikil flóð valda því að við verðum næstum strandaglópar.